Okay, grade 11s. So yesterday we discussed depreciation, the two types of depreciation and how they relate to the interest formulae that we've gotten used to. Today we'll be going back to dealing with interest. So remember, those are the formulae with the plus signs. Let's just go over some basics about interest so that we can see how this new section, different compounding periods, relates to that. Up until now, we've pretty much been given something along the lines of the following. Our interest rate is 15% per annum, simple interest. Or alternatively, 15% per annum compound interest. So we knew that if we were using simple interest, it would have been A equals P1 plus IN, where our I is equal to 0,15. If we knew we were dealing with compound interest, it would be A equals P1 plus I to the power of N, again, where I is equal to 0,15. But now we're going to start discussing different compounding periods. Now, before I get into that explanation, you'll notice that this one is called compound interest. So when we discuss different compounding periods, we are not talking about simple interest. This is no longer in play when we discuss different compounding periods. In fact, if we need to use simple interest, the question will state explicitly that it is simple interest. If it doesn't say simple interest, you can assume compound interest. All right, so let's talk about the compounding period that we're actually used to. You may not realize it, but you are currently used to a compounding period already. So when we say 15% per annum, compound interest, we're generally talking about the fact that it is compounded annually. Let's say that we have 10,000 Rand and we are going to deposit this in an account that is going to earn interest at 15% per annum compound. All right, we're going to assume that since the compounding period hasn't been specified, that it's compounded annually. That means this is at time 0, so right at the beginning. Then at the end of the first year, they're going to look at our accounts and they're going to say, oh, this person has 10,000 Rand in their account. Let's work out 15% of that 10,000 Rand, and that's going to be 1,500 Rand. So we're going to add that to their account, which means that at the end of the first year, we'll end up with 11,500 Rand. Then at the end of year 2, that's when they look again at our accounts and they say, okay, now they've got 11,500 Rand, so let's work out 15% of that and add it on. Now, the point here is not the actual value. What I want to focus on is when exactly the bank decided to pay us interest. Now, do you notice that they decided to look at what was in the account at the end of the first year, then again at the end of the second year, and they'll obviously do that at the end of the third year. That is when they decide to compound our interest. So if we say that something is compounded annually, that means that at the end of the first year, that is the first time they'll look at paying us interest. End of second year, that's the second time that they'll look at paying us interest. The end of the third year, that's the third time they'll look at paying us interest, etc., etc. Alrighty. So we now have this new thing where we're talking about different compounding periods. Now we can get things like your interest is at 15% per annum compounded. Most common one and a really typical one in real life is monthly. Here what's happening is that instead of looking at our account at the end of every year, they're looking at it at the end of every month. But notice something pretty important. This still says per annum, which still means per year. Now, this 15% is what happens over the full year. But because they're actually compounding it every month, they're going to use an interest rate that is 15% divided by how many months there are in a year, which I hope you know is 12. So that's why when we try and work this out, we're going to say 1 plus, and this isn't the interest rate that we're getting every month. That's for the whole year, hence the per annum. So we're going to divide it by 12 because they're compounding our account per month. Okay, and then we're going to say the number of years times 12, because if I have 1 year, it's 12 months. They're going to give me interest 12 times. If I have 2 years, that's 24 months. So they're going to give me interest 24 times. So let's look at this on a practical example. Again, we've deposited our 10,000 Rand, but now we're getting 15% per annum compounded monthly. Now, instead of them looking at our account for the first time at the end of the first year to give us interest, what they're going to do is they're going to say at the end of the first month, they're going to say, okay, let's give this person interest. Now we said it's 15% per year, which is 0.15. But we're doing this every month, so we're going to divide it by 12, and we're going to give them this on their 10,000 Rand. So now I'm getting 125 Rand extra on my account at the end of month 1. So then at the end of month 2, they're going to do this again. But now instead of on the 10,000, it'll be the 10,125 Rand, which will be 126 Rand and 56 cents. Okay, so instead of them giving me interest or looking at my account at the end of 1 year, they're going to look at my account at the end of every month and give me interest on that. We're looking at it monthly, so we need to remember to divide our percentage by the number of compounding periods. And in this case, it's 12. So this example is actually what happens in most of our bank accounts. So if you have a savings account or a check account, or if you have a credit card, or anything like that, the bank is applying interest monthly. Obviously, if you have a savings account, you're earning interest monthly. If you have a credit card, unfortunately, you are paying interest monthly. So this is pretty standard fare in real life. Okay, a different example that we could be looking at, or rather a different compounding period that we could be looking at, is semi-annually. So another word for semi-annually would be half yearly. Okay, so if we're talking half yearly, we mean that things are going to happen, the compounding is going to happen 2 times per year. So I deposit my money. After 6 months, they're going to look at what's in the account, they're going to apply interest. Then after another 6 months, they're going to look at it and apply interest. So let's look at our example again of 15% per annum compounded half yearly. Alrighty. So the full year, you're still getting the 15% per annum per year, but it's happening twice in the year. So we're going to have our 10,000 that we deposit right at the beginning, and then after 6 months, they're going to say, okay, this person has 10,000 in their account and they're getting 15%, but it's happening, they're getting 15% per annum, but it's happening twice. So we need to remember to divide this by 2. All right, a few others that you might get: quarterly. Now, just be very careful, all right? And it feels pretty intuitive that quarterly means that it happens 4 times a year, which means that it happens every 3 months. Then we will remember that when we take our interest rate, it'll be 0.15 or 15%, and we divide it by 4 because it happens 4 times in the year. We can also deal with daily. There are some investments out there that happen daily. Okay. This is where you want to start being fancy and you want to say, well, there's 365 days, but sometimes there's 366 days because of a leap year. Should we be saying 365 and a quarter? Make your life simple. We're just going to say 365. So then again, we'll have this divided by 365. Okay. There's only one more that I want to touch on, and it comes up very rarely, but I do just want to comment on it in case it appears in one of your questions. I don't want you to get tripped up. Okay. biannually. Okay, this actually means every 2 years. This happens every 2 years, meaning that if you're talking about, I'm going to have this investment for 2 years, they're only going to give you interest once. So if I think about it, it happens half a time in 1 year. This is why it's a trickier one, and it doesn't come up very often. Here, your compounding period is half because it happens half a time per year. Remember, your compounding numbers here. So this half yearly meant it happened twice a year. Quarterly meant it happened 4 times a year. Monthly meant that it happened 12 times a year. Daily means that it happens 365 times a year. And biannually now means that it only happens half a time a year because it only happens every 2 years. We would say our 15% divided by a half. I know that this can seem pretty tricky, but I'm hoping that it makes sense. Your interest rate is usually quoted per annum, meaning that that's the total for the year. But your compounding period is how often it actually happens in your account. So how often do they actually give you your interest rate? So let's just go over the formula real quick. I might use different lettering to what they use in your textbook. It's really not important. The actual letters that you use here are not that important. What is important is that you understand what each component is. All right, so our formula would be A, the accumulated or the end value, is equal to our principal or the current present value, the initial value, times 1 plus, now normally we just say I to the power of n, but because we're dealing with different compounding periods, we're going to take our per annum interest rate and divide it by our compounding periods. And then we're going to say to the power of n, where n is still the number of years, okay, times our compounding periods. And that's why it's so important that your compounding period is how many times it happens in a year, because here we're going to times it by the year. So our compounding period per annum, just once, it just happens once a year. Our compounding period semi-annually, twice a year. So in 1 year, it would happen twice. In 2 years, it would happen 4 times, etc., etc. Quarterly, it would be 4 times a year. Then we're talking about monthly, it would be 12 times a year. Daily, it would be 365 times a year. And then the tricky one, biannually. And this is why it's important to have it per year. It's only half a time in a year. Hopefully this video has helped to clarify what is actually meant by compounding periods and what it means in practice. All right, guys, good luck.